The great hall of the Galactic Engineering Council stretched for nearly a mile, its crystalline walls humming with the energy of 1,000 different species gathered together. Ambassador Crixto, a tall being with 4 arms and skin that shifted colors with her mood, stood at the central podium and looked out at the assembled representatives. Her skin was a worried shade of purple. "We have called this emergency session," she said, her voice translated instantly into hundreds of languages, "because the void barrier continues to expand. Within 300 years, it will consume the outer colonies. Within 500 years, it will reach the core worlds." Murmurs spread through the crowd like ripples on water. The void barrier was a region of space where the very fabric of reality had begun to tear. Ships that entered it simply ceased to exist. No signals returned. No wreckage was ever found. "Our fastest ships take 12 years to reach the edge of explored space," Crystal continued. "To evacuate our populations, to find new homes beyond the barrier's reach, we would need to travel faster, much faster. Our best engineers have worked for centuries on this problem. They have failed." In the back of the hall, a small group sat quietly. They were the newest members of the Galactic Council, having been discovered only 50 years ago on a small blue planet in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. The humans, as they called themselves, had been given observer status but were not yet full members. Most species considered them primitive, barely worthy of notice. Dr. Sarah Chen leaned over to her colleague Marcus Williams. "Did you hear that? They've been working on faster ships for centuries." Marcus nodded slowly. He was a stocky man with gray at his temples and hands that were rough from years of working with machinery. "And they're stuck. Their fastest ships take 12 years to cross what we call the local bubble," Sarah whispered. "Marcus, that's not fast at all. Our theoretical models suggest we could do it in weeks." Marcus looked at her sharply. "Keep your voice down. We're supposed to be observers only." But it was too late. A being near them, one of the Velthrani with their enormous eyes and delicate antennae, had heard. The Velthrani were known for their curiosity and their tendency to share information widely. "What did you say?" the Velthrani asked, turning toward Sarah. "Weeks. That is impossible. The physics do not allow it." Sarah felt her face grow warm. "I'm sorry, I was just speculating. We humans don't really understand your technology yet." But the Velthrani was already signaling to others. Within minutes, several representatives had gathered around the human delegation. Among them was a senior member of the Korthax, the species that had dominated starship design for the past 2,000 years. His name was Chief Engineer Vorn, and his rocky face showed the closest thing to amusement his species could display. "The young species thinks they can improve upon our work," Vorn said, his voice like grinding stones. "How charming! Tell me, little human, how many centuries has your kind been building starships?" "We built our first spacecraft about 80 years ago," Sarah admitted. Laughter rumbled through the group. Vorn's amusement grew stronger. 80 years. We have been refining our designs for 80,000 years. Every principle, every theorem, every engineering solution has been perfected. There is nothing left to discover." Marcus stood up slowly. He was not an educated man in the formal sense, not like Sarah with her degrees and titles. He had started as a mechanic fixing trucks in Nebraska before the aliens arrived. But he had a mind that could look at any machine and understand how it worked, how it could be better. "May I ask a question, Chief Engineer?" Marcus said. Vorn made a gesture that meant yes. "How does your standard drive work, in simple terms?" Vorn seemed surprised by the question. "We fold space. We create a bubble around the ship that compresses the space ahead and expands the space behind. The ship rides this wave through the compressed region." "And how do you power it?" "We use quantum crystal matrices to generate the necessary field strength. The crystals can only produce so much power before they fracture. This limits our speed." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. What if you didn't need the crystals? Silence fell over the group. Vorn's expression shifted to what might have been concern. Everything requires the crystals. They are the foundation of all our technology. Sure, for your technology, Marcus said, but we humans never had crystals. We had to figure out other ways to do things. He turned to Sarah. Show them the equations. Sarah hesitated. The equations were theoretical, the work of brilliant physicists who had been trying to solve the problem of faster-than-light travel even before the aliens arrived. When humanity discovered that the galaxy was full of intelligent life, and that faster-than-light travel was possible, those physicists had gone into overdrive. They had studied the alien technology and found it elegant but limited. This could cause problems, Sarah said quietly. We're supposed to be observers. Dr. Chen, Marcus said, there's a wall of nothing coming to eat everyone in this galaxy. I think this is the time for problems. Sarah took a deep breath and activated her portable display. Blue light filled the air, showing a complex web of mathematical formulas. The gathered aliens leaned in, their various translation devices working hard to convert human mathematics into terms they could understand. Your crystal matrices are limited because they operate on a linear power curve, Sarah explained. You push more power in, you get more power out, but only to a point. Then the crystals break. She highlighted a section of the equations. We propose a recursive loop system. Instead of fighting against the limitations of your power source, we use the folded space itself as an amplifier. Vorn stared at the equations for a long moment. His stone face cracked in what Sarah later learned was extreme surprise. This cannot work. Space cannot be used as a power source. It is passive, empty. With respect, Chief Engineer, that's not quite right, Sarah said. Space has energy, enormous amounts of it. Your crystals create the initial fold, yes, but that fold creates stress in space. That stress can be harvested. The energy from the stress powers a larger fold which creates more stress, which can be harvested for more power. You are describing perpetual motion, another engineer said dismissively. That is impossible. Not perpetual, Marcus jumped in. It runs out eventually. But instead of getting maybe 1,000% of your input energy back, you get maybe 10 million% before the system needs to reset, enough to cross the galaxy in days instead of years. The gathered aliens fell silent. Vorn reached out with one massive hand and manipulated the equations, running calculations that Sarah could barely follow. His rocky face went through several expressions she did not recognize. This would require complete redesign of everything, Vorn finally said. Every ship, every station, every transport system in the galaxy would need to be rebuilt. Yes, Sarah agreed. The cost would be astronomical. Yes. It would take generations to implement. Probably. Vorn turned to look at Marcus, then at Sarah, then back at the equations floating in the air. When he spoke again, his voice was different. There was something in it that sounded almost like hope. I need to bring this to the Engineering Council immediately. If this works, if this actually works. He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Ambassador Crystal, who had come down from the podium when she noticed the commotion, pushed through the crowd. Her skin was now a vibrant yellow, indicating extreme interest. What is happening here? Why has my presentation been interrupted? Vorn turned to face her. Ambassador, I believe the humans may have just solved our problem. The news spread through the great hall like fire through dry grass. Within hours, it had spread to every corner of the galaxy. Humanity, the youngest and most primitive species in the Galactic Council, had done in 80 years what the ancient races had failed to do in 80,000. They had looked at the problem with fresh eyes, unburdened by assumptions about what was possible and what was not. And in doing so, they had begun a revolution that would change everything. 6 months had passed since that day in the Great Hall, and Dr. Sarah Chen found herself standing in the largest shipyard in the galaxy. The Korthax construction facility orbited a dying star, using its energy to power forges that could shape metal at the molecular level. Ships of all sizes filled the surrounding space, waiting for repairs or upgrades, their designs unchanged for thousands of years. But now everything was changing. "The prototype is nearly complete," Vorn said, walking beside her. In the months since their first meeting, the Korthax engineer had become something unexpected, a friend. He had thrown his considerable influence behind the human project, silencing critics and clearing bureaucratic obstacles. "I admit, I did not believe it would come together so quickly." Sarah smiled. "We had good help. Your fabrication technology is incredible. It would have taken us decades to build this on Earth." The ship before them was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Where Galactic Council vessels were elegant and flowing, designed according to aesthetic principles refined over millennia, this ship was angular and practical. It looked, as Marcus had said when he first saw the plans, like something a human would actually build. "The human touch," Vorn agreed. "Your engineers have a different philosophy than ours. We seek to minimize, to reduce everything to its simplest form. You seem to prefer redundancy, backup systems for backup systems." "It's how we survived," Sarah said. "Our planet was dangerous. Our technology was unreliable. We learned early that things break, and when they break, you need another way to get the job done." Marcus emerged from the ship's main hatch, wiping grease from his hands onto a rag that had long since stopped being useful for cleaning anything. Behind him came a team of human and Korthax engineers, all speaking rapidly in a mix of languages that had become common in the shipyard. "Power systems are online," Marcus reported. "We ran the recursive loop at 10% capacity. It works exactly like Sarah's equations predicted." Sarah felt a surge of relief mixed with excitement. The mathematics had been sound, but mathematics and reality did not always agree. And the stress on the hull. "Within acceptable parameters, the Korthax alloys are handling the spatial distortion better than we expected." Marcus grinned. "I think we're ready for a real test." Vorn made a sound that Sarah had learned to interpret as concern. "The Council has not yet approved a test flight. There are those who believe this project is moving too quickly." "There are those who believe humans should still be observers," Sarah replied. "But the void barrier doesn't care about politics." This was the truth that had driven the project forward despite opposition. Every day the barrier crept a little closer. Every month, another colony reported anomalies at its edge, ships that vanished without trace. The galaxy was running out of time, and everyone knew it. The approval for the test flight came 3 days later. It was granted reluctantly by a council that was deeply divided. Some members saw the human innovation as salvation. Others saw it as a threat to the established order. Still others simply could not believe that such a young species could succeed where the ancient races had failed. "You understand the risks," Ambassador Crixtal said as the human team prepared to board the prototype. Her skin was a pale gray, the color of worry and uncertainty. "If the ship fails, if you are lost, there are those who will use this as evidence that the entire project should be abandoned." Sarah nodded. "We understand. That's why this crew is all volunteers." The crew was small, just 12 people. 6 humans and 6 members of other species who had joined the project despite pressure from their governments. There was Vorn, of course, who had insisted on being aboard for the test. There was Zara, a young Velthrani engineer whose ability to see electromagnetic fields made her invaluable for monitoring the drive systems. There was Krex, a Malthani pilot whose species was known throughout the galaxy for their reflexes and their courage. And there was Marcus, who had personally overseen the construction of the ship's core systems. Sarah had tried to convince him to stay behind, to coordinate from the shipyard, but he had refused. "I've been fixing machines my whole life," he had told her. This is the most important machine ever built. If it breaks, I need to be there to fix it. The ship was named the Pathfinder, a name chosen by the human team over the objections of Korthak's tradition, which held that ships should not be named until they had completed their first voyage. Sarah liked the name. It reminded her of what they were trying to do. The launch was broadcast across the galaxy. Billions of beings watched as the angular ship rose from the shipyard's docking bay and moved into open space. Its human design stood out against the elegant curves of the Korthak's vessels around it, a reminder of how much things had already changed. "Pathfinder, you are cleared for departure," the shipyard controller announced. "Safe travels." Sarah sat in the command chair, her heart pounding. The human approach to Starship Command was different from the Galactic Council's standard methods. Council ships used neural interfaces, allowing pilots to control the vessel with thought alone. Humans found this technology difficult to adapt to, so the Pathfinder had been designed with manual controls instead. "Activating primary drive," Krex announced from the pilot's station. "Standard space fold initiating." The ship shuddered slightly as the initial field formed around them. On the displays, Sarah could see the familiar distortion of folded space, the same effect that had powered Galactic Council vessels for millennia. But this was just the beginning. "Recursive loop standing by," Zara reported. "Energy harvest systems at nominal capacity." "All engineering stations report ready," Marcus added from his position at the back of the bridge. "Let's see what this baby can do." Sarah took a deep breath. "Engage recursive loop, 20% capacity." The effect was immediate and dramatic. The displays flickered as new power flooded the systems. The ship lurched forward, not violently, but with a sense of purpose that Sarah had never felt on any vessel before. The stars outside shifted, stretching into lines as the ship accelerated far beyond normal drive speeds. "Energy harvest functioning perfectly," Zara said, her voice rising with excitement. "We are now traveling at approximately 5 times standard maximum velocity." Gasps of amazement came from around the bridge. Even Vorn, who had studied the equations for months, seemed stunned by the reality of what they had created. "Increase to 50%, Sarah ordered. Again the ship responded. The engine's hum deepened, and the stars became solid lines of light. Instruments showed velocities that should have been impossible, that would have torn any traditional ship apart. 10 times maximum, Zara reported. 15, 20. "Hull stress is still within limits," Marcus confirmed. "The fold is stable, the loop is holding." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. It was working. The crazy idea she had discussed with colleagues in quiet conference rooms, the mathematics that other scientists had dismissed as fantasy, was actually working. "Full power," she said. "Let's show them what humanity can do." The Pathfinder leaped forward. The universe around them seemed to fold in on itself, stars and nebulae stretching and compressing in ways that hurt to look at. Instruments registered speeds that were literally off their scales. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The ship dropped back into normal space, its drive cycling down to rest mode. Around them were stars that Sarah did not recognize. "Where are we?" she asked. Zara was already checking the navigation systems. Her antennae twitched with disbelief. "We have traveled approximately 400 light-years from the shipyard. The trip took 7 minutes and 23 seconds. The bridge erupted in cheers. Humans hugged aliens. Vorn made a sound that might have been laughter. Even the usually stoic Krex was grinning, his sharp teeth visible in a display that would have frightened anyone who did not know him. But Sarah's attention was drawn to the viewscreen. Through the transparent hull, she could see something that made her heart stop. "Look," she whispered, pointing. The crew fell silent. Before them, at the very edge of visible space, was a wall of darkness. Not the darkness of empty space, which is sprinkled with stars and galaxies. This was absolute darkness, a void where nothing existed at all. "The barrier," Vorn said quietly. "We are much closer than any council ship has ever been." Sarah stared at the approaching darkness. From this distance, she could see things that remote sensors had never captured. The edge of the barrier was not smooth but ragged, like a tear in fabric. It pulsed slowly, expanding outward with each pulse, eating the stars in its path. "We can outrun it now," she said. "We can evacuate the colonies, find new worlds beyond its reach." Marcus moved to stand beside her. "Or maybe we can do more than that. Maybe we can figure out what it is. Maybe we can stop it." It was a bold statement, perhaps too bold. But looking at the faces of her crew, Sarah saw something she had not expected. She saw hope. The message they sent back to the council was short and simple. "Test successful. The Pathfinder has crossed 400 light-years in 7 minutes. The revolution has begun." Word of the Pathfinder's success spread faster than any ship could fly. Within days, every government in the Galactic Council was demanding access to the new technology. Within weeks, the first contracts were being signed to build production models. Within months, the galaxy was transformed. The Korthax shipyards worked around the clock, their ancient forges producing new vessels at a pace never before seen. Human engineers, once relegated to observer status, were now the most sought-after consultants in the galaxy. Companies and governments offered fortunes for their expertise, desperate to be among the first to field the revolutionary new drives. But not everyone was happy with the changes. The syndicate of trade masters had grown wealthy over millennia by controlling the slow flow of goods between distant systems. Their cargo ships took years to complete their routes, and during that time, they had absolute control over what moved and where it moved to. The new drives threatened to destroy their monopoly. The orthodoxy of fixed stars was a religious movement that had spread across dozens of species. They believed that the slow pace of interstellar travel was ordained by the universe itself, a limitation that kept civilizations humble and prevented the hubris that had destroyed other galaxies. To them, the human innovation was not progress but sacrilege. And then there were the architects, the oldest known species in the galaxy. They had been building ships and stations for longer than any other race could remember, and their designs were considered the pinnacle of engineering excellence. The suggestion that a species barely out of its infancy could improve upon their work was deeply offensive. Sarah Chen found herself at the center of all these conflicts. As the public face of the human engineering team, she was invited to speak before councils and committees, to defend her work against critics, and to explain again and again how and why the new drives worked. "The architects have requested a meeting," Vorn told her one morning, his rocky face showing the Korthax equivalent of concern. "This is unusual. They rarely interact with other species directly." "What do they want?" "Unknown, but I suggest you bring Marcus. The architects respect practical knowledge over theoretical understanding." The meeting took place in a structure so old that no one knew who had built it. The architect who greeted them was not a physical being in the traditional sense. It was a consciousness housed in a mechanical body that had been maintained and upgraded for over 1,000,000 years. "You are the human called Sarah Chen," the architect said. Its voice was like wind through ancient stones. "You created the equations that power the new drives." "I led the team that developed them," Sarah clarified. "It was not my work alone." "And you," the architect continued, turning to Marcus, "are the one called Marcus Williams. You built the first prototype with your own hands." Marcus nodded. "I had a lot of help." The architect was silent for a long moment. Then it made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Help, yes. You humans are fond of that concept. You help each other. You help other species. You seek help when you need it. This is unusual among the younger races." "Is it?" Sarah asked. "Most species, when they rise to power, use that power to dominate others. They hoard their knowledge, their technology, their resources. They see the universe as a competition to be won. But you humans, the architect paused. You share, you teach, you lift others up rather than pushing them down. We don't always, Marcus said honestly. We've had our share of problems, wars, exploitation. We're not perfect. No species is perfect, the architect agreed. But your imperfections are different from most. You have learned from your mistakes in ways that others have not. This is why we wish to meet with you. The architect led them deeper into the ancient structure. They passed through chambers filled with artifacts from civilizations long dead, technologies that had been lost and found and lost again over the ages. Finally, they reached a room at the very heart of the structure. In the center of the room was a model of the galaxy, but it was not the galaxy as it currently existed. It was the galaxy as it had been millions of years ago, before the void barrier had appeared. The barrier is not a natural phenomenon, the architect said. It was created. Sarah felt cold spread through her body. Created by whom? By us, by the architects. Long ago, before most of your species' ancestors had developed intelligence, we faced a threat from beyond the galaxy. Beings of pure entropy, living voids that consumed everything in their path. We could not defeat them, so we contained them. The barrier is a wall we built to hold them back. Marcus stared at the model. But the barrier is expanding. It's going to consume everything. Yes, the wall is failing. The entropy beings are stronger than we anticipated, and we are no longer strong enough to maintain the barrier. Within 1,000 years, it will collapse entirely. The beings will be free to consume this galaxy and then move on to others. Why are you telling us this? Sarah asked. The architect turned to face her directly. Because you humans may be the only species capable of solving this problem. Your minds work differently than ours. You see possibilities that we cannot. You have already proven this with your drive technology. You want us to save the galaxy, Marcus sounded incredulous. We've been members of the Council for 50 years. We're the youngest species here. Youth is not always a weakness, the architect said. Sometimes it is the greatest strength. Young minds are not bound by assumptions about what is possible. They do not know what cannot be done, so they attempt things that older minds would never consider. The architect reached out with one ancient mechanical hand and touched the model. The image shifted, showing the current state of the galaxy, with the barrier expanding like a slow-moving wave of destruction. We have studied the barrier for 1,000,000 years, the architect said. We have tried everything we know to stop it. We have failed. Our knowledge is too deep, our assumptions too fixed. We need someone to look at the problem with fresh eyes. Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances. The weight of what the architect was asking settled on them like a physical burden. We'll need time, Sarah said finally, and resources, and access to everything you know about the barrier and the beings it contains. You will have all of these things and more, the architect promised. The survival of this galaxy depends on it. When they returned to the human headquarters on Earth, Sarah called a meeting of every engineer and scientist who had worked on the Drive project. The room was crowded with humans and aliens alike, all of them wondering why they had been summoned. We have a new challenge, Sarah announced. The greatest challenge any of us will ever face. She explained what the architect had told them. She showed them the model of the barrier, the ancient threat it contained, and the timeline for catastrophe. When she finished, the room was silent. That's impossible, someone said finally. We can't fight something like that. We were told the new drives were impossible too, Marcus pointed out. We built them anyway. But this is different, this is. This is our chance to prove that humanity belongs in this galaxy, Sarah said. Not as observers, not as consultants, as equal partners in saving everyone, every species, every world, every life. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of humans and aliens alike. I know it seems impossible, but that's what we do. We take impossible problems and we find solutions that no one else has thought of. We did it with the drives. We can do it again. Slowly, one by one, the engineers began to nod. The fear in their eyes was still there, but it was joined by something else now: determination, resolve, hope. "What's the first step?" someone asked. Sarah smiled. "The first step is understanding the problem. We need to get closer to the barrier than anyone has ever been. We need to study it, analyze it, figure out how it works, and then we need to find its weakness." "That's a lot of needs," Marcus observed. "Then we'd better get started." The fleet that gathered at the edge of the void barrier was the largest ever assembled. Ships from 100 species flew together, their different designs creating a pattern against the stars. At the center of the formation was the Pathfinder II, a massive vessel that had been designed specifically for this mission. Dr. Sarah Chen stood on the bridge, watching the barrier through the viewscreen. It was even more terrifying up close, a wall of absolute nothing that stretched across the visible universe. Looking at it made her feel very small and very mortal. "All stations report ready," Vorn announced from his position at the engineering console. "The fleet is standing by for your orders." "The architects have uploaded everything they know about the barrier to our databases," Zara added. "It will take some time to process all of the information." Sarah nodded slowly. 6 months of preparation had brought them to this point. 6 months of building ships and training crews and studying ancient records. 6 months of arguments with the council, with critics, with those who thought the mission was either too dangerous or not dangerous enough. And now it was time to find out if any of it had been worth it. "Marcus, what's your assessment?" she asked. Marcus was at the back of the bridge, surrounded by holographic displays showing data from dozens of sensors. He had spent months working with the architects, learning everything they knew about the barrier's construction and the beings it contained. "The barrier is a modified spatial fold," he said, "similar to what our drives use, but on a massive scale. Instead of moving a ship through space, it creates a region where nothing can exist. No matter, no energy, no information. And the entropy beings. They're still in there on the other side. The architect records suggest they're intelligent, maybe more intelligent than us. They knew the barrier was coming, and they adapted. They've been eating away at it from the inside for 1,000,000 years. Can we reinforce it?" Marcus shook his head. "Not with the technology we have now. The architects tried that. The problem is scale. The barrier covers 100 light years. Even with our new drives, we don't have enough power to affect something that big." Sarah turned to face her crew. They were a mix of humans and aliens, veterans of the original Pathfinder mission and newcomers who had joined the project because they believed in its goals. They were waiting for her to tell them what to do. "The architects gave up because they assumed the problem was beyond solving," she said. "They tried to reinforce the barrier, and when that failed, they gave up. But that's not the human way." "What is the human way?" Krex asked from the pilot's station. Sarah smiled. "We don't just try one thing, we try everything. And if everything fails, we invent something new." She turned to the holographic display in the center of the bridge. "Computer, show me a detailed analysis of the barrier's structure." The display shifted, showing a cross-section of the barrier. It was not a solid wall, as she had assumed, but a complex web of interacting forces. The spatial fold at its core was surrounded by layers of supporting structures, each one carefully calibrated to maintain the whole. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a particular region. "The architects built the barrier from the outside. They created the fold first, then added supporting structures to keep it stable." "That is the standard approach," Vorn confirmed. "You build the core, then build around it." "But what if you did it the other way around? What if you built the supports first, then created the fold inside them?" Marcus straightened, his eyes widening. "You're thinking about the recursive loop." Exactly. Our drives use the stress created by spatial folding as a power source. What if we could do the same thing with the barrier? What if instead of trying to reinforce it from outside, we helped it reinforce itself from inside? The bridge was silent as the crew processed this idea. It was Zara who spoke first. The entropy beings would resist. They have been working to destroy the barrier for 1,000,000 years. If we give the barrier a power source they cannot consume, they will try to find a way around it. Maybe, Sarah agreed. But right now, the barrier is slowly losing the fight. If we can change that, if we can give it an advantage, maybe we can buy enough time to find a permanent solution. Or maybe we can do better than that, Marcus said slowly. He was staring at the display, his mind working through possibilities. The entropy beings consume, that's what they do. They eat matter, energy, information, everything. But our recursive loop doesn't just generate power, it generates order, structure, the opposite of entropy. Sarah felt a shock of understanding run through her. You're saying we could use the loop not just to reinforce the barrier, but to actually fight back against the beings themselves. I don't know, it's just a theory, but think about it. These beings are pure entropy. They've never encountered anything like our technology before. Nobody in this galaxy has ever thought about using spatial folding as a weapon against disorder. Because nobody ever needed to, Vorn said, until now. The discussion continued for hours. Engineers argued about feasibility. Scientists debated the physics. Pilots discussed how close they could get to the barrier without being consumed by it. Through it all, Sarah listened and learned and slowly built a plan. The key, she realized, was the adaptive nature of human thinking. The architects had tried to solve the barrier problem using the same approaches they used for everything else. They were brilliant, but their brilliance was fixed, focused, unable to adapt to new situations. Humans, in contrast, were natural improvisers. They took pieces from different places and put them together in ways that no one had imagined before. We're going to need a test, she announced finally. A small-scale demonstration to prove the concept works. I volunteer to fly the probe, Krex said immediately. I am the best pilot in this fleet. It won't be a piloted mission. The probe will be automated, designed to approach the barrier and deploy a miniature recursive loop. If it works, the loop should create a self-sustaining pocket of stability within the barrier. And if it doesn't work, someone asked. Then we learn from the failure and try something else. The probe was ready within a week. It was small, only a few meters long, but it contained some of the most advanced technology ever created. At its core was a miniaturized version of the Pathfinder's drive system, modified to project its effects outward instead of propelling a ship. Launching probe, Zara announced as the tiny vessel separated from the Pathfinder II and began its approach to the barrier. The fleet watched in tense silence as the probe drew closer to the wall of nothing. Sensors tracked its position, its speed, its power levels. Everything appeared normal until the moment the probe crossed into the barrier's outer boundary. Contact, Zara reported. The probe has entered the barrier. Systems are still functioning. There was surprise in her voice. It should have been destroyed immediately. The recursive loop is active, Marcus confirmed. It's creating a bubble of stable space around the probe. The barrier can't touch it. On the view screen, the probe appeared as a tiny point of light against the absolute darkness. It was moving deeper into the barrier, deeper than any vessel had ever gone. Then something changed. I'm detecting movement within the barrier, Zara said, her antenna twitching with alarm. Something is approaching the probe. The sensors captured an image that would haunt Sarah's dreams for years to come. Out of the darkness came a shape, or rather an absence of shape. It was a void within a void, a darkness so deep that it made the barrier itself look bright by comparison, and it was moving with purpose, with intelligence. Entropy being, Vorn whispered, we have drawn its attention. The being approached the probe. For a moment, nothing happened. The probe continued to function, its recursive loop maintaining a tiny pocket of reality in the midst of non-existence. The being seemed to study it, to try to understand this strange intruder. Then the being touched the loop. The effect was immediate and spectacular. Where the being's darkness met the loop structure, there was a reaction. The sensor readings went wild, showing energy levels that should have been impossible. The loop was not just maintaining itself. It was expanding, pushing back against the being, creating order where entropy had reigned. "It's working," Marcus breathed. "The loop is actually hurting it." The being recoiled, pulling away from the probe. For the first time in a million years, something had caused it pain. "The probe systems are overloading," Zara warned. "The reaction is generating more power than it was designed to handle." Sarah watched as the tiny point of light on the viewscreen grew brighter, then brighter still. A moment later, it flared and vanished. "Probe destroyed," Zara confirmed, "but not by the barrier. The power surge exceeded its structural limits." Silence fell over the bridge. The probe was gone, but it had achieved something extraordinary. It had proven that the entropy beings could be fought, that the barrier could be not just maintained but strengthened. "We need bigger probes," Marcus said finally, "and stronger recursive loops, and a lot more of them." Sarah nodded. "We need a whole new kind of ship, something designed specifically for this mission, something that can survive inside the barrier long enough to make a real difference." She turned to face her crew, and she saw in their faces the same thing she was feeling. Not fear, though fear was certainly there. Not doubt, though doubt was there too. What she saw was determination, the understanding that they had discovered something important, and that they had the ability to use that discovery to save everything. "Get me a channel to the council," she ordered, "and someone find the architects. We have a lot of work to do." 2 years had passed since the probe first touched the barrier. 2 years of building, of testing, of failing and trying again. 2 years of watching the barrier creep closer to inhabited space while racing to find a way to stop it. The fleet that now gathered at the barrier's edge was nothing like the one that had come before. Gone were the elegant curves of traditional Galactic Council vessels. In their place were angular, practical ships built according to human engineering principles. Each one carried multiple recursive loops, each one designed to survive and fight in the darkness beyond. The flagship of this new fleet was the Unity, a massive vessel that had been built by 100 species working together. Human engineers had designed its core systems. Korthax craftsmen had shaped its hull. Velthrani navigators had plotted its course. Malthani pilots would guide it through the dangers ahead. And at the center of its bridge stood Dr. Sarah Chen, no longer just a scientist or an engineer, but the commander of the first fleet ever assembled to fight the entropy beings. "All ships report ready," Vorn announced from his station. He had aged since their first meeting in the Great Hall, his rocky skin showing cracks that had not been there before. But his voice was strong, and his commitment had never wavered. "The architects have confirmed that they will not interfere with our mission," Zara added. "They have expressed what I believe is hope, though they say they have forgotten how to feel such an emotion." "Marcus?" Sarah asked, turning to her oldest friend and most trusted advisor. Marcus grinned from his position at the engineering console. His hands, still rough despite years of work with alien technology, rested on controls that he had helped design. "We're as ready as we'll ever be. The new loops are stronger and more stable than anything we've built before. The ships can maintain them for hours inside the barrier, and if something goes wrong," he shrugged, "we've got backup plans for our backup plans." "Then let's not keep the universe waiting." Sarah took a deep breath and activated the fleet-wide communications channel. "All ships, this is Commander Chen. Today we do something that has never been done before. We enter the barrier not to flee from it, but to fight it, not to survive, but to conquer." She paused, letting her words sink in. Across the fleet, Crews of 100 different species listened to the translated message. They were mechanics and philosophers, soldiers and artists, beings who had come from every corner of the galaxy to be part of this moment. The entropy beings have been consuming this galaxy for 1,000,000 years. They have eaten stars and planets. They have destroyed civilizations that none of us remember. They believed they could not be stopped, and for a long time they were right. Sarah looked out at the barrier, at the wall of nothing that had defined the limits of galactic civilization for longer than any species could recall. They were wrong. The Unity led the fleet into the darkness. The sensation of crossing the barrier's boundary was unlike anything Sarah had experienced before. Even with the recursive loops protecting the ship, she could feel a pressure against her mind, a weight that seemed to press down from every direction. Around her, the crew was struggling with the same feeling. "Maintain focus," she ordered. "The loops are holding, we are safe." "For now," Marcus muttered. The fleet moved deeper into the barrier, following a path that Sarah and the architects had calculated together. The goal was the heart of the void, the place where the entropy beings had first entered this universe. If they could seal that breach, the architects believed the beings would slowly fade away, their connection to their source of power severed. "Contact," Zara announced. "Multiple contacts, they're coming from all directions." The view screen filled with shapes, or rather with absences. Dozens of entropy beings, then hundreds, then thousands. They surrounded the fleet like predators circling wounded prey. "All ships activate combat loops," Sarah commanded. "Fire at will." The battle that followed was unlike any that had ever been fought. The human-designed ships did not use traditional weapons. Instead, they projected fields of structured space, beams of pure order that cut through the entropy beings like light through shadow. The beings fought back with their only weapon, consumption. They attacked the ships directly, trying to break through their protective loops and devour the structure within. Some succeeded. Ships flickered and vanished, their crews lost to the void. But for every ship that fell, a dozen entropy beings were destroyed. The recursive loops, feeding on the being's own entropy, grew stronger with each encounter. The more the beings attacked, the more powerful the fleet's defenses became. "We're reaching the center," Krex reported from the pilot's station. "The readings are unlike anything I've ever seen." Sarah looked at the view screen and saw something that made her heart stop. At the center of the barrier was a rift, a tear in the fabric of reality itself. Through the rift, she could see something that her mind struggled to comprehend. Not another universe, not another dimension, but absolute nothingness. A place where existence itself had never taken hold. "That's where they come from," Marcus said quietly. "That's the source of all of this." "Then that's what we need to close." Sarah turned to her crew. "All ships converge on my position. Prepare to deploy the seal." The seal was the culmination of 2 years of work. It was not a weapon in the traditional sense, but a structure, a framework of interlocking recursive loops designed to create permanent order at the edge of the rift. Once deployed, it would feed on the entropy bleeding through the tear, growing stronger over time until the rift was permanently closed. The fleet fought its way to the center of the barrier. Ships fell, crews died, but the survivors pressed on. They were not just fighting for their own lives anymore. They were fighting for everyone, for every species and every world that would be consumed if they failed. "Seal deployment in 10 seconds, Marcus announced. "All ships maintain defensive perimeter." The entropy beings seemed to sense what was about to happen. They attacked with renewed fury, throwing themselves against the fleet's defenses in waves of darkness. The view screen was filled with their shapeless forms, pressing in from every direction. 5 seconds, 4, 3. One of them broke through. A massive being, larger than any they had faced before, crashed through the defensive perimeter and headed straight for the Unity. The ship shuddered as the being's darkness touched its outer loops, began to consume them. 2, 1 seal deployed. The seal activated at the exact moment the being's touch reached the Unity's hull. The effect was like nothing Sarah had ever witnessed. The being was not just destroyed but transformed. Its entropy was converted into structure, its darkness into light. For one brief moment, the entity that had been consuming existence became a part of existence instead. And then the seal reached the rift. The explosion of order was visible from every corner of the galaxy. The barrier, which had been a wall of nothing, became something else entirely. A ring of light, of structure, of pure and permanent reality. The entropy beings caught within it did not die. They changed. They became part of the order they had tried to destroy. The rift sealed, the bleeding stopped, the galaxy was saved. Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Unity, tears streaming down her face, watching as the light expanded outward. Around her, her crew was cheering, crying, embracing each other without regard for species or culture or any of the divisions that had once seemed so important. "We did it," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. "We actually did it." "Humanity did it," Vorn corrected. "Your species with its strange minds and its refusal to accept the impossible. You have saved us all." Sarah shook her head. "Humanity didn't do it alone. We had help. From you, from the architects, from everyone who believed that the problem could be solved. This was a victory for all of us." The Unity led the fleet back out of the transformed barrier. As they emerged into normal space, they found an entire galaxy waiting to greet them. Ships from every species had gathered, their lights blinking in patterns that crossed every language barrier. Celebration, gratitude, joy. The aftermath of the battle was a time of profound change for the galaxy. The Galactic Council, which had spent millennia managing the slow decline of civilization, now faced the challenge of managing unprecedented growth. With the threat of the barrier gone, with ships that could cross the galaxy in days instead of years, everything was possible. New colonies were founded on worlds that had never been explored. Ancient species reconnected with descendants who had been separated by the slow pace of travel. Trade routes that had once taken lifetimes could now be completed in weeks. And at the center of it all were the humans, no longer observers or consultants but full partners in the galactic community. The species that had been discovered only 50 years ago had proven itself worthy of standing alongside civilizations that had existed for millennia. Sarah Chen returned to Earth for the first time in years. She stood on a hill overlooking the city where she had grown up, watching the sun set over a world that had changed beyond recognition. Ships moved through the sky above her, carrying passengers and cargo to every corner of the galaxy. Marcus joined her as the stars began to appear. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the lights of ships moving against the darker lights of distant suns. "What happens now?" Marcus asked finally. Sarah smiled. "Now we find the next impossible problem. The universe is a big place, Marcus. There's always something else to fix." She looked up at the stars, at the galaxy that humanity had helped to save, and felt a sense of peace settle over her. They had proven something important, not just to the other species but to themselves. They had shown that fresh eyes and open minds could find solutions that ancient wisdom had missed. They had shown that humanity, for all its flaws and limitations, had something to offer the universe. Something unique. Something irreplaceable. Something wonderful. The future stretched out before them, bright with possibilities. And somewhere out there among the stars, new challenges were waiting to be faced. Human challenges. And humans would face them together.